part of Avant.org and you for your attention. One important piece of feedback we received from participants at the last Ethereal was that in the hustle and bustle of the event, it was hard for people to find quiet moments. For that reason, and because we want to offer an experience that is deeply personal and encouraging of reflection, we've decided to open a meditation station, or Zen Zone, which you can find outside in the lounge downstairs. We encourage you to explore the Zen Zone anytime you would like during the day. Our Zen Zone is offered by One Center, which provides health and wellness programs for individuals and corporate clients. She'll be leading that over there, our internet, so we can feel the clear and centered nodes in our network. In addition to our artworks and Zen Zone, we will be offering interactive workshops in the workshop area downstairs. The workshop area seats 25 people. Seating for each workshop will be on a first-come, first-served basis. You can find the workshop schedule on the back of your badge and on the program tab of the Ethereal website at etherealsummit.com. Our workshops include deep dives into blockchain use cases in design, sustainable energy, media, policy, and more, as well as technical workshops on smart contracts and Ethereum development. I'll be co-leading design thinking for the blockchain workshop shortly after this, as well as our universal basic income workshop later this afternoon. Throughout the day, we encourage you to participate, both in person and on social media, using the hashtag EtherealSF. All the events on the main stage here will be live streamed. So if you have friends who couldn't make it today, please share the live stream link with them so they can join remotely. The live stream link can be found at etherealsummit.com. Once again, thank you for coming, and we hope you enjoy the day.
Token hysteria is upon us. To help us decipher the complexities, please welcome the editorial director of Flipboard, Josh Quittner.
Nothing, very little about this, so I'm hoping to learn a lot. Today we're going to talk about token generating events, and I guess the name of this panel should be Token Generating Events. I have a lot of questions. I would like to start by introducing each of, I guess you guys could all just make a quick introduction of yourselves. Every one of you has been involved in one way or another with a token generating event, so it makes you de facto experts. Matt, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Matt Liston. I'm a long decentralized prediction markets and short Lambos. I founded Augur. I worked for Ethereum, and I now work.
Tracks one for another. This opens up the door to what we call the long tail of user-generated currencies. Currencies, of course, are only valuable if they're liquid. We did a token generation event in June. I work on business development and messaging.
Piotr?
My name is Piotr Janiuk. I'm Golem's CTO. Golem is an Airbnb for computing power. So we try to create a global network of computing power that can be rented, and you can pay with tokens on Ethereum, on its own GNT token. And apart from just paying, we also allow this token to be upgraded once there's a need to add additional logic to contracts and to the network itself.
All right, wonderful. So I thought what would be fun to do here is collectively, as a way of kind of getting at the parameters of this, what I would love to do is come up with an idea for a company that we're going to start right now. And the company will be kind of model for a company that would work with the issuance of a token, with generating a token to fund the development of that company. So when we start doing this, I'd like to hear, I know, Matt, you have some pretty big ideas about what you shouldn't do. What kinds of companies shouldn't be started with tokens? So maybe you could kind of take us through that.
Yeah, so I'd say look at it the other way around. Start a Ethereum project. Identify, what layer it's on. Is it application? Is it platform? Is it at the protocol layer? Design your decentralized thing, and then decide if it absolutely needs a token. Don't come at this saying, we want to launch a token. How can we design a product to support that? That's sort of the biggest way to
So
start
can you be
that.
a little bit more explicit? I mean,
Yeah.
if I wanted to start a company that made hats,
Yeah.
could I use a token to finance the development of that company?
Nope.
Why?
You're not creating a decentralized platform or protocol.
So there'd be no reason to do
There's
that.
no reason.
No
You have a
benefit to it.
centralized business. You can fund with equity, and there's no need for a token.
Galia, you had some ideas about what would make a good kind of a company if
Yeah.
you're going to start one today.
We actually look at this
Can everybody hear?
Can you hear me? Cool.
Yeah,
We look at this a little bit differently. We see tokens as the fuel for a network, right? And so you can look at networks the way Matt is talking about, decentralized online networks. You can also look out there in the world and see a lot of offline networks. So we think of Smartly, I don't know how you'd apply sewing. Maybe they're providing as shares or equities in a normal company. You can kind of distribute participation in a network.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you is basically we want the network effect. These work.
There's some kind of additional benefit to being an early adopter. A network obviously is more and more valuable as it grows. A network starts with nodes. The original nodes in the network receive the least value from the network because they don't have yet the network effect. So if they can be incentivized through holding tokens, which are kind of parts of this network, as it grows, that's sort of a future promise for their early labor and early belief. We worked with a community of mothers, and we allowed them to issue a currency called hearts. All of the mothers got hearts for joining, and then there were all different ways that they could earn hearts. You can think of this like points or like loyalty points, but these hearts were actually spendable within a marketplace. All of the mothers contributed products and services to the marketplace, and we saw within a year over 1 million transactions between 20,000 mothers who were actually quite cash constrained before, and the Hearts budget kind of gave the fuel to the network for them to be trading. So you can ask all kinds of questions like, well, why weren't they just doing this with dollars? Well, they didn't have any dollars. Why weren't they just using existing marketplaces like Craigslist or like Facebook groups? There wasn't affinity and trust within those groups for the mothers to kind of go out on a limb and give their products and services for Hearts. And in fact, the real problem that we ran into in the Hearts ecosystem, and what I would suggest today is a great token model, is that these hearts weren't liquid to any other currency. You couldn't sell them for dollars. If you left the mothers community and you had all these hearts, you couldn't spend them anywhere else. You can think of it like the frequent flyer miles that you have that are very restricted to one airline, let's say. But if you could spend them everywhere, they'd be much more valuable to you. So I was thinking to go down that community currency pathway.
Community currency. Piotr, what do you think? Would you have any ideas about what we could start?
Oh, this community currency may work, provided that you really know how to gather those tokens at first, and then to have a place when you can exchange them. And you have to verify user with mothers. That really you are not, a child who would like to use this token. You have to be a mother. You have to earn them and gather someone. And you need infrastructure to exchange them for not only not only between mothers and tokens, but for fiat money, as I believe. So this additional infrastructure is something that may be a bit of concern here.
All right, well, I'm looking for something tangible here. What if there were digital vending that would distribute news and information about a variety, be paid in tokens if you put these digital vending machines on your sites and people actually used them? And I'm thinking more verticals here. Like I have a site about skiing and you have one about snowboarding and you have one about digital currencies, and you get people to come look and read, and perhaps purchase information with
It's
tokens.
essentially usability. So now you have a marketplace, and instead of someone being able to use their preferred currency, you're forcing them to use this currency. In the current ecosystem, that means one, going on Coinbase and getting Ether, and then two, going on another exchange and getting vending machine coin. So one, there's a barrier there. You're going to lose users. And two, you're passing on a financial burden to your users. So now, like I said, they'd prefer to use US dollars, and now they're forced to use this marketplace currency. And they have to assume, an added cost, which is the volatility risk over the period which they must hold that currency in order to use your marketplace. So you're basically pushing users away. These medium...
How would you break those down? Or is it just a complete...
Works the same way.
All right. So...
Maybe I can be helpful and give some things that do work with the token, potentially. So one area of infrastructure where I think there's going to be an explosion over the next year is Oracle marketplaces and Oracle protocol.
Idea for a company that we can use tokens to get off the ground, right? So what's the first thing we do? Do we do a white paper? What would be the next step that you would take? Now that we've got this great idea, we've got a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, we've been bouncing it off, people at Consensus, and they say this is a great idea.
Did that ever happen?
Has it happened?
Are there white papers that raise 20 million?
With nothing more than...
nothing more than a white paper?
Yeah.
I'm just curious because I hear this a lot.
Yeah, I do too. I was very curious about that.
White paper, no product? They have a test net. They have and they've been working on their
Last
tech
I
for
read,
years.
they're not going to have a test net until Q1 2018.
Okay. Are there other ones? Because they didn't raise 20 million.
Well, they did, I think a little bit above that. Let's see. Maybe DentaCoin? Let's go for something uncontroversial. Have you seen the Facebook ads for this? I think there's quite a few examples.
So you're basically saying it's possible, but not a very good idea.
It's possible, but not sustainable for the ecosystem.
I think that it's even possible to raise money without white paper, but it's a very bad idea.
Right.
But right now, it looks like it is possible.
Okay, so we're going to do some
I think what's
prototyping.
interesting kind of to the audience is that there are no rules. Right? There are no rules for this, and we want to give you a panel that says how to launch a token, but there is no way to launch a token. There's the way that Gnosis launched a token, there's the way that Bancor launched a token, there's the way that Tezos launched a token, there's the way that DentaCoin launched a token, so there are...
And are they all different ways?
They're all somewhat different. They have similarities. Some work well, some work less well. There's tons and tons of problems, but I think the really interesting part, at least for the entrepreneurs in the room, is that there are no rules. With raising venture capital, there are some rules, right? Meet the people, make the PowerPoint, do the first meeting with the associate. Hopefully you get bumped up to the next meeting. There's somewhat of a playbook for how venture financing works. We are now kind of in the stage in tokens where it's quite time that we develop this playbook in terms of standardization, best practices, so that people looking at these token sales actually know what they're looking at. I remember when Gnosis did the reverse Dutch auction, and that was kind of a new
idea, right? And how full-fledged a prototype, what is a prototype exactly? I mean, is it out in the wild? Is it a beta test? What you think of as a beta test? Is it something that's just running on a server in somebody's garage?
Hopefully not in someone's garage. It should be running on a test net, which means all over people are running this. The prototype should, it's not necessarily going to be UX friendly. It's going to be pretty much relegated to Ethereum experts using it. But it should have the basic functionality of sort of the economics of what you're trying to do. Not necessarily great design. It's shouldn't be just a marketing tool is what I'm getting at.
It should be more of a proof of concept.
Yes.
And is there a point at which we know that this is working? Do we get ratification from the network? Do people say this is awesome? Like, when are you going to add this feature and that feature?
Not really, because these things are going to take quite a while to test. We're designing a new type of system, and unfortunately, it's going to take iteration and failure.
And in this world, you would just be completely open about it, or would you be secretive about it?
Oh, completely open.
Completely open.
Yeah.
This is not like a magic leap kind of a situation where we're going to go into our secret laboratory and bang away at something for a while.
No, I mean, you have, an interesting thing with blockchain where, the core of your product is smart contracts. They need to be trusted. I mean, one, they're going to be run on, the Ethereum public network so they can be decompiled eventually. But two, you need to expose your source code because otherwise people aren't going to put money into your contracts. So totally open.
So in a lot of ways, source code is more definitive than the white paper.
Yes.
The white paper is almost like the assembly language, or it explains it to mere mortals.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of like a range of white papers. There's white papers which are, like the Ethereum yellow paper or something where it's a bunch of equations, and then there's white papers which look a little bit more like a business prospectus.
More markety.
Yeah, and I for most things I go in between. For protocols, you need a lot of the hard math and whatnot. But for things that are, platforms, you want your users and your future stakeholders to understand what you're doing, and they're not all going to have math PhDs.
Okay. So we have an idea. We've been prototyping it out in the open. Everybody's banging away at it. We're soliciting feedback, actively soliciting feedback.
Super important.
We've put together a white paper of some degree of complexity that ought to answer both the business side questions and some of the technical questions. Although the source code is out there for all to see and kind of peer through. At a certain point in time, we now believe that we're ready to go. Is that right? Is there anything else that needs to be done?
You're never going to be ready to go. But yeah, at a
As
certain
ready
point,
as we'll ever
it's
be.
time to jump in.
Okay. So what's the next point? How do we, go ahead.
I'll tell you what worked well for us at Bancor was we went out there. We went to every conference that we could go to. We went to every blockchain competition. We went to every tech competition. We went to every meetup. We went to every event for the industry. One of the unique attributes of a token sale like this is that your contributors are all around the world, right? You might never meet though of all of this speaking, put it online, questions from all over the world. It's a grueling process, but it's kind of, when you look at the pros and cons of moving from centralized project funding to this decentralized model, your diligence process is decentralized also. You're getting due diligence from all over the world.
You need to be out there. Piotr, when you guys were doing Golem, did you had a kind of prototype network out?
Well, we had been in our internal production for 2 years before starting the the token generation event. We thought that we understand the idea very, very well.
Yeah.
But when we moved to this decentralized world and crypto world, we really wanted to get feedback, and mostly critical feedback, because it helped us understand the interconnection between our protocol and our ideas with the external world. And we had to readjust our idea and white paper quite a lot of times before moving on. So it's crucial that you get the feedback and criticisms from the community, which really has some fresh view of what you do, something that you don't have because you're quite a lot in your product and project, and you may not see obstacles that are pretty close ahead.
But it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me chip in 1 second. We missed the most important and frustrating part, and that is when you're writing your white paper, especially when you're designing your token, you have to talk to about 5 sets of lawyers and make sure you're not.
I was going to get to that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That comes before you release all this material.
And,
really important.
And generally speaking, what are the lawyers are saying what to you? What's the kind of overarching thing that they're worried about?
The lawyers are saying,
concerned.
hey, we don't really understand that you're designing a token which is supposed to, support an economy and be part of your software. You can't do any of this. Good luck, and we also can't rubber stamp this because there's no regulatory certainty yet.
Right. Okay.
And this still
But
costs
so what
you
you're
money,
saying to
doesn't
them
it?
is no, you don't get it. All this token does is it buys some measure of utility. The token of itself has utility. Is that what you're kind of arguing back?
Right.
That this is not a speculative.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's what they're helping make sure. But the process of designing a utility token is sometimes contradictory to the process of making sure it's not going to put you in jail.
Right.
Yeah.
Contradictory too? Well, I mean, I could see how there maybe might be some unease as they're jostling for position. But.
Well, say it's useful to have a certain mechanism in your token design, and under pre-existing regulatory framework, it kind of looks like a swap.
Right.
The lawyer will tell you, hey, you're going to piss off the CFTC, and you'll say, hey, this is actually really necessary to design our economy, and you'll have to make a risk decision.
Are you finding, this world is so new, are you finding lawyers that now get it, they understand the difference, or a really good lawyer who understands securities law?
There is no lawyer who knows, not that they're not trying, or not that they're not educating themselves, but there is no regulatory framework yet. So there's no such thing as a legal opinion. There's just, hey, here's the risk parameters.
Right.
Here's the risk parameters. We think it's okay.
Truly new place to sort of bring innovation and the fearlessness around it back to the forefront, which is there are a lot of unknowns here, and there are going to be a lot of mistakes, and I always like to go back to the intention of the creators. Are people trying to do something with good intentions? Are they trying to move forward? And I think it's going to be really important for us as a community to support each other, right? Because there'll be a lot of face plants, and some of them will be bad intentioned, and that's not necessarily to be supported. But as we all kind of forge ahead and try these new things, if we wait for the lawyers to tell us, what works with the old laws, we won't be moving forward.
Right. All right, so now we got our team of lawyers, or our lawyer, and the lawyer is like holding his or her nose, or maybe not. Maybe they're saying, okay, we can do this, but here's how we need to frame it, and let's be cognizant of these risks and broadcast that. So now we're ready to have a token generating event. Is that right, or is there another step that we're missing?
Yeah, I mean, there's different steps in the legal process that occur at different times. But yeah, no.
So for instance, like...
well, okay, so there's the token analysis and, essentially saying, is what we're doing legal? And then there's the process of sort of, creating an entity which can support this token sale. And that typically comes after.
Okay, and what does that mean, creating the entity? What does it mean to support what does one need to do to support a token sale?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few jurisdictions where, you can create an entity and launch a token sale from that entity. Gnosis uses Gibraltar. Switzerland is very popular. Hong Kong, Singapore. These are sort of the more legitimate places that I'd recommend. Other projects, completely offshore and just kind of say, okay, that this limits our risk a little bit and go to Caymans or something like that.
And I'm sorry to be so dense here, but what you're saying is you need effectively a government.
Yep.
When you say an entity,
yep.
What you'd like to say is government, something that's going to permit this and say, yeah, this is kosher here.
We're not, at least the ones who don't want to go to jail, we're not just pure anarchists anymore. We're not living in the decentralized cloud. There's still a legal system, so you have to interact with that legal system.
And so you have to choose which legal system you want to, almost like registering a corporation in Delaware.
Yep.
I mean, you want to find one that's favorable to this idea, that's not hostile to it.
Right, but also has some legitimacy and isn't just giving you a carte blanche to do whatever you want.
Right, so that you are in fact going through the process of fulfilling certain kinds of regulatory obligations.
Yep.
Okay. And how did you guys do that? Who was your entity?
Yeah, I through a law firm essentially approached the government of Gibraltar, and we educated them, and it was a really great process. And they decided, actually under British common law, that this is something you can do, and we did it.
Wow. And how long ago was that?
So the token sale was April 24th, so this was in the months before that.
Okay. Of this year?
Yeah.
So you guys are real old veterans.
I was going to say, it sounds like ancient history. Wow.
That was a good experience so far.
Yeah.
We've had a great experience as well. We did a Swiss foundation streams, but are trying to promote the adoption of a protocol that has some benefit to society. We worked with MME, which is the lawyers that worked on the Ethereum Foundation as well. And what's nice about working in Switzerland and as a foundation is that there are actually very, very strict laws and regulations around how not-for-profits need to handle themselves. So everything that we do needs to pass arm's length, needs to pass, a variety of tests vis-a-vis the Swiss regulator. And it's not necessarily because we like passing tests, but we want to make sure that everything that we're doing, will pass a test when needed, because regulation, of course, will come.
Right.
And so the idea is
Whoa. Is that the Swiss government?
That's the Swiss. They call me every day. That's the idea, is to try and operate in a way that kind of minimizes risk to the project by being smart about not only right now what's the level of regulation, but what will naturally come.
Piotr, who did you guys use? What entity did you backs you up?
Well, we are incorporated in Switzerland as well.
Switzerland.
And I think that once you have everything set in place, so you can't do it in parallel. So you can incorporate your company, you can talk with lawyers. Once you have to be sure that you're on the safe side. but at the same time you can work on preparing the token generation event, implementing additional code that you need. It should go in parallel. You can even start your TGE before everything is incorporated.
Great. All right, so we've got an idea. We've prototyped it. We've gotten tons of feedback from potential users who are clamoring for more. We have found an entity to back us. Is there any other major step before the blessed event?
Yeah, I mean, Galia got the next step, which is communicate, and I would add in communicate, but don't hype.
Communicate through white paper and...
Well, the white paper, but also,
going to events.
She said AMA, and yeah, largely going to events. But you want an open stream of communication between you and your eventual users. And again, you don't hype it. You don't take out advertisements.
You're not pitching it. It's not like a roadshow that you would do with an IPO.
No, it's a, you're going around and giving technical presentations and educating people about what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But you're not saying, buy this, buy this, buy this.
Mm-hmm.
And another part of communicating is your community. So most projects today will actually build out community on a variety of channels, Telegram, Slack, what have you, and that's a 24/7 communication channel. So people that are curious about your project, they might support it, they might not support it, but you might end up with, channels on your phone with thousands, even tens of thousands of members all over the world, different time zones, asking you questions around the clock, and when you don't answer them, the assumption is you don't have a good answer. And so it is actually a very high-paced and consuming environment, but the more you communicate, the more you do answer the questions, the more you have good answers, the more you give them quickly and authentically from your own voice, the more people can support your project organically and then also bring in other supporters.
So you're doing this, when you're out there doing it, have you already established a date that you're going to launch your token? Or is that all very much kind of, we know it when we see it?
Typically, you need a little fluidity because there's question marks. There could be large events in the Ethereum ecosystem that makes you delay. There could be legal complications. Mm-hmm. Regarding the large events, something we missed is you do multiple security audits, and you also have a bug bounty program with sizable rewards. That's really, really critical in this space.
Sizable awards payable in?
Probably Ether.
In Ether, or use another established token.
Effect for me is more of a byproduct.
Right.
But if it's just network effect, that's a Ponzi scheme. So you need some utility that without that utility you couldn't design your system.
And so by giving it a separate name, we're differentiating its utility from all the other currencies.
Yeah.
It has a specific use case within this network.
Right. It's part of your software essentially.
Right. So like going back to the Chuck E. Cheese analogy that everybody uses, you can only use the Chuck E. Cheese coin in those vending machines.
Yep. Although I'd really, in this metaphor, I'd prefer if Chuck E. Cheese used US dollars. But they're essentially doing that for a regulatory arbitrage.
It's an interesting point because we're back to kind of the fundamental economic reason for creating a new token to begin with, right? So in this example, why not just pay all your bug bounties in Ether? Well, do you have Ether? Ether costs money, right? You have your own token. It doesn't cost any money. You just printed it out of thin air. Mm-hmm. The question is, does someone want it? And as we all know, money is worth what we believe it to be worth. And so if people believe that your token will be worth something, they'll be willing to work for it. And you can pay them in something that doesn't cost you anything right now. And you can kind of jumpstart this network of collaborators. So this kind of takes us back to the very essence of creating a new token, right? Which is an alternative path to pooling resources to get any project or initiative off the ground. If you could just use Ether, then you'd fundraise, get dollars, buy Ether, give everyone Ether to help you create your project, and go from there. And in fact, a lot of the token projects do have some initial financing, which allows them to get to the moment of a token generation event. And it's actually becoming more and more costly as the noise gets louder and it's harder to break through with your idea and get attention for it. But this really is the economic essence that we're talking about, which is why and how can you create money out of thin air? And it really goes back to money is belief in a project. So if you can mint your own money and people believe in it, you can prepay for the collaboration of people around your project in a way that would previously require you to raise venture capital or self-fund a project. As we know, venture capitalists need a certain type of return in order for a project to be interesting to them. Maybe contributors to these kinds of projects don't need those kinds of returns. Maybe just a little return, maybe just seeing the project alive in the world is interesting enough for them to contribute a little bit. And so when you blow that out to kind of what projects can and can't be funded or jump-started in this way, I think we're going to see a whole new class of companies, as you call it.
Right, which is the dream. So we have, we arrive at the point where we actually generate tokens, we issue tokens, and that whole formula has already been spelled out, I would imagine, somewhere, like how much currency we're going to generate and how much money we're going to raise. Is that right?
Oh, not at all.
Not at all.
It's completely fluid. I mean, there's multiple mechanisms for how money comes in. Well, then the tokens are distributed proportionally. But before we stop, can we talk about best practices for a second? So one thing,
20.
right? Venture is tricky. I mean, I'm not in favor of throwing out everything. And one thing that I'd like to take from venture is, basically propose that more projects raise less money and keep more tokens, which essentially requires them to deliver and capitalize in stages. I think if we saw more projects doing this, we'd see more. We don't know if products are going to follow through, but I think eventually we'd see more products falling through.
And that actually was going to be my last question, so I'm glad you hit it. Like, what's the guarantee that after we raise all this money, we're going to do what we said we were going to do?
Right.
And that's it. And you're saying that what we should do is as an industry, we should be much more cautious as we move forward.
Yes.
Great.
And I think to Matt's point, the best incentive you can give a team to keep working on the project and creating value in the token is pay yourself in your own token. Right? If that is your liquidity event, if that is your monetization horizon, you bet your butt entrepreneurs are going to work on that token and try and create value into it.
Great.
Yeah, and constrain this token to, I don't know, you cannot pay it out for a year or so. So that for this year, people really try to deliver something, or even longer.
Yeah. Look at the long term. Great. It's been such a pleasure talking to the three of you. I really appreciate your time here, and thank you as well for your
Thanks.
attention.
Not only is creating a token a maze of crypto economics, but for the consumer, what should we be investing in? Please join Lee Kewen, fintech reporter for the IB Times, as we explore investment strategies with some of the space's biggest investors.
Hi, everybody. Is this on? Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you so much for joining us here today. We've got a rock star panel here with cryptocurrency experts, venture capitalists. If you're going to be tweeting their nuggets of wisdom during the panel, please make sure your phone is on silent and that you use the hashtag #EtherealSF. And also, if you don't get to ask your question during our question and answer part of the segment, please feel free to tweet your question, to talk on Reddit. That's why God made social media. And to kick us off, I was thinking I would start with a little bit of a poem. It's from the 14th century Sufi poet Hafiz. Learn to recognize the counterfeit coins that may buy you just a moment of pleasure, but then drag you like a broken man behind a farting camel. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. Let's start with Olaf Carlson-Wee. He is the founder of Parley Chain Capital and the former head of risk at Coinbase. You know what? I think let's start off with a survey. By show of hands here, including our panelists, who's participated so far in a token sale or is thinking of launching one of their own? Yeah?
Well done.
Okay.
Choose just one. I really like when folks are thinking about more experimental token sale mechanics so that all participants have kind of a better experience in the sale. I think that 0x was that kind of model of the token sale was really interesting and innovative. I know that Jason Touche of TrueBit has created this interactive token offering that hypothetically should more align incentives very well. So I think those are some of the things I'm thinking about.
Cool. So next up, we have Mark Backus, who is founder of Venture One and co-founder of the decentralized trading platform Omega One. Do you have a favorite token sale you want to mention?
I guess it's a bit of a leading question. Omega One is actually going through a token generation event right now. So definitely Omega, I think, is one to watch.
Sounds good.
I also, as a VC, I think it's really interesting to look at the token mechanics and how they interface with more traditional finance. And there's a company that is looking to do a token launch, which is actually convertible debt that converts either into the token or into equity of the company if the token sale doesn't go ahead. So I think there are some innovative models that are...
All right, so next up we have Kavita Gupta, who's the managing partner at Consensus Ventures. Do you have a favorite blockchain-based asset or cryptocurrency you want to mention?
I think now we are all plugging our amazing companies out here, so I think I have to use this platform to plug Consensus companies. So Grid Plus is about to go on tokens, and then for their token launch. So I think that's going to be very interesting to watch. It's also on the renewable solar energy space, which is very close to my heart. And I think because I'm sitting next to Gil, which is also one of our portfolio company prize, I'm going to be super excited about that.
Yeah, so as she said, the guy next to me right here is Gil, the legendary angel investor. Wow, so many projects you've been involved with, including Filecoin, including Civic. You're right now an advisor for Prize. Do you have a favorite token sale that you want to mention?
Kavita actually probably, I guess, took my thunder, so I'll have to pick another one. I think the BCAP, the first sort of security token, was one of the more interesting ones, to sort of Olaf's point of people doing interesting things. And that was sort of the first tokenized venture fund. So another very interesting model.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool ones out there. So once again, my name is Lee Quinn. I'm the tech reporter at the International Business Times. And let's start with the million-dollar question, guys. When we think about due diligence for blockchain projects, what are the main priorities that you think about? We're talking about white papers, we're talking about teams, we're talking about the project's market position. When you think about these questions for yourself, what are your priorities?
I think for me, it's just some interesting and new technological features. I really think that if you're not creating a kind of new suite of tools for developers that can that allows them to build something really interesting is absolutely crucial. And what makes
does this need to be decentralized? How does it benefit from being on the blockchain versus is it a token attached to something?
I think coming from years of traditional private equity and combining it with blockchain, for me, one of the biggest thing apart from developer tool is the adaption and adoption by the bigger community for this space and for this technology. So whether it's a very innovative method on the infrastructure layer or some sort of a protocol on the top of protocol layer, or it's an application from fintech to health technologies to consumer marketing tools, any interesting way which is filling the gap of efficiency and redundancy in the current system, and then also helping a better transparent ecosystem for the adoption is something which I'm very deep focused on.
Do you have any last thoughts you want to add about due diligence and how we should think about that when it comes to blockchain projects, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think what everyone said is accurate and fair. Due diligence for blockchain companies in some ways no different to due diligence for other companies that are not blockchain companies. You still need, a great team. You need the ability to execute. You need a, strategy. You need a market to disrupt. You need, all of these things haven't changed. And then I think the extra layer that blockchain adds is, does the token make sense? How is it connected to the business model? If it's not connected to the business model, what's the point of it? What's the value of it?
Gil, I know that you have some pretty strong opinions about red flags. What are the red flags you look for in a blockchain project that make you say, this one is not for me?
Well, my favorite example recently was the sand coin in Russia. that you invest in so they can go mine sand in a quarry. So again, sort of back to the earlier point, is the token actually creating software of value, or is it just simply a mechanism for fundraising?
Gotcha. Does anyone else on the panel have something they want to add for a red flag?
I think just adding to Gil's point, most of the projects we coming across right now is coming from a very token launch bubble world, where it's all about figuring out a way to create a utility token, irrespective whether that's actually what consumer gonna end up having or not having, even if the company is really good. So a lot of time when we talk to the companies and we really like everything else ticks off and we're like, it's great, but I think traditional route is a better route for you because this utility doesn't really make sense. So I think it's an extra additional diligence and a red flag on top of every sort of technical diligence and business diligence we are doing.
I think, if you can't understand the business or you can't understand the token, that should be a red flag. I don't know that it always is a red flag for people when they're looking at these things. If you understand an industry and if you understand the economics of an industry, you should be able to look at it and say, this is going to work, this makes sense. And so many of them don't.
That's a really good point to bring up. I know that
if you are generating the token, you need to think about liquidity in terms of incentives, because you want, if you're giving immediate liquidity to people, especially to employees or to your co-founders or whatnot, you sort of want to think about how you're aligning their incentives, their incentives, with the token purchases, how are you aligning incentives around actually building the business. If you provide a lot of liquidity with the token launches that we're seeing, obviously very large, it can actually provide a disincentive to people to build a business, which can be a problem.
Does anyone else here on the panel want to add some thoughts about what we should think about when we consider the liquidity of a project? All right, so then let's move.
I think he has some thoughts.
Yeah?
Well, yeah, I just think there's an interesting dynamic right now with centralized exchanges where if you want to participate in a token sale, part of the dynamic is, is there going to be liquidity afterwards on exchange? And because there are so many token sales right now, actually a lot of the time the answer might be no. But I'm thinking a lot about decentralized exchanges and how they allow trading, basically, 1 minute after the token is actually distributed on the blockchain, and it's very permissionless, and so you have some level of liquidity pool there. So I think those decentralized exchanges will actually facilitate more tokens launching without relying on those centralized exchanges deciding to list the token.
Yeah. But I think I want to add to that. I think the onus is on the investment projects, like investment people around on this panel, because if exchange is the only bottleneck for liquidity right now with the token launches, we just need to have better exchanges, invest in more and more, both regional exchanges and global exchanges, and create an ecosystem. So from Consensus Ventures, we are investing into both regional and the central exchanges and looking at some of the mixed method towards centralized and decentralized exchanges. If we can't have a pure decentralized exchange right now, is one of a very big investment thesis for us.
I think going off of that, I have a question for the entire panel, and I want to start off with Gil. How do you think about diversifying your portfolio? How do you arrange your priorities? How do you hedge your bets? What are the things that go into these decisions for you?
So fund managers are compensated by diversifying and trying to sort of make their portfolio safe for their investors. I have the luxury of not having any LPs, so I tend to be highly centralized. I would say that right now the bulk of my portfolio is actually in only 2 projects. One is Ethereum, and the other is the Prize project that I've been working on with the team, and that's probably 80%.
Interesting.
I think this is such a new system, having that exit opportunity for the equity position also. So I think our hedging bets are more with respect to what are the companies we want to be part of in the long term, and what are the companies do we want to see play it along the year with respect to the growth stage of the company. And that pretty much defines how do we maintain the liquidity in the portfolio, but definitely I have to say that we are still, at least for us, still playing and understanding how the liquidity from the token launches is going to impact the overall portfolio hedge.
What do you think?
Well, I think I share Gil's perspective. Venture One is structured in a similar way where we don't charge fees and such. And our strategy around portfolio allocation is to build the ecosystem. So we invest heavily in few companies, and we work with them very closely to make sure that everything is done correctly, which is, I think, really important in the space.
Yeah, I think despite this being a new area technologically, I don't think portfolio theory has really changed in a meaningful way. So using simple tools like the Kelly criterion to determine position sizing, I think, is still best practices.
With that in mind, how do you evaluate different kinds of blockchain-based assets, right? This is not only a world of strict or similar cryptocurrencies, there are all different kinds of blockchain-based assets and all different kinds of cryptocurrencies. What are, in your mind, the main categories, and how do you evaluate them differently? Starting with Gil.
I probably look at three buckets: the core protocols, the things like Bitcoin and Ethereum and others that people can build on top of, the app type protocol projects, and then increasingly there are these asset-backed projects, and Sand being a bad example, and BCAP, for example, being a pretty good one. And I, for whatever reason, don't spend a lot of time on the asset-backed ones. I think that it is going to happen. There will be a lot of very interesting assets moving onto the blockchain, but I'm not a good financial market evaluator as much as I'm a technical evaluator. So I tend to focus more on the more software-focused projects, which are mainly apps at this point.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think sitting in consensus ecosystem provides us a lot of individual expertise, from technology to ecosystem, or a long view and a short view of how this particular technology ecosystem, like the whole space, is going to move. But apart from that, when it comes to doing the financial valuation, I think we take what has been a traditional outlook and add the new components on it and try to see the correlations and the permutations of moving it, whether it's a sector which is going to define it, whether it's a protocol infrastructure technology which is going to define the financial valuation, or is it going to be a complete game of market, token launch, bubble sector which is going to define this particular company. So I think so far, in my experience, it's holistic.
I think Kavit is right. Each company in this space is so unique because apart from the usual business metrics that you're looking at, you're also looking at, okay, is it a security token? Is it a utility token? How does the utility token interact with the business model, if it does, etc.? And we're seeing this very polarized world of, because of the legal infrastructure that we have, utility tokens on one hand, security tokens on the other, and then businesses trying to work around this to come up with something that they can market and also build their business around. And then you have the liquidity issue, which is, if you're holding equity, that equity can become a security token perhaps, but perhaps not. So it's really very case by case.
Yeah, I personally don't really see any value in security, this idea of a security that's a token, because at the end of the day, you can't legally really replace transfer of ownership with the cryptographic token transfer. Like you still need that paper security to transfer to, so it's kind of just a weird interface. It's not really, like the token itself isn't really the security in that sense. So I care a lot more about tokens that actually have to interact with a peer-to-peer network, and where there is no business entity trying to kind of extract revenues from that network, but rather that token is useful within that peer-to-peer network. Also, Gil, to your point, something I thought of while you were talking about this idea of tokens being backed by something, I think that we're increasingly going to move to a world where collateral underneath tokens is not held in the real world, but in smart contracts. So the DAI stablecoin, I think, is the main project that's really pioneering this, where you can actually lock up Ether or Ethereum-compatible tokens in a smart contract in order to generate back a kind of asset-backed stablecoin on top. And I think that concept of smart contract-backed backed coins is going to grow and grow and grow as the smart contract tooling becomes more robust.
So, Mark, you touched on something that I think we should really tease out here. I know that you used to be an attorney. What are the main topics that you think are going to influence cryptocurrency investing over the next 2 years? What should we be watching out for?
Regulation.
What kind of regulation?
Well, that's the big question. You hear things, mutters. It's multi-jurisdictional. Many blockchain companies are, situated offshore. They have complex international legal structures trying to work with or around certain regulations.
Yeah.
There is a camp of people who think that a safe bet is to sort of self-nominate your token as a security, the sort of SAFT model, and that provides a kind of a safe harbor for things. The alternative to that is to make sure that your token can never be considered a security.
Yeah.
It does make it hard for token issuers, it does make it hard for blockchain companies, but hopefully the upshoot of it is some kind of, and it may become self-regulating, to be honest, some kind of a framework that people can buy into and say, well, this is what we're dealing with, this is how we should look at it, this is how the stakeholders can be protected.
Yeah, I think that's all really important things for us to be thinking about. Olaf and Kavita, you also mentioned things I think are really important to tease out, these aspects of community engagement. When you think about a blockchain-based project, how do you evaluate the role of the community and also the project's role in the overall ecosystem? What are the questions you ask yourself?
I think the whole ethos of consensus has always been having that adaptation in the community and creating this Ethereum platform, which is like worldwide community, like looking at it like that. And I think we have taken the similar ethos for the venture side also. And when we look at the project, we are like, as I mentioned before, how is it solving a problem which exists today? And if it would be my friends or my parents or somebody in the ecosystem, how easy it is for them to use it and what are the benefits it's going to give back to the community, both with respect to even in the regional system, US and Africa and like everything internationally. And I think when you start thinking from that direction and bring that thinking into doing your diligence of the company, it really helps you to see that apart from one particular solution, which could be, it's an amazing innovative solution, 100 people are going to adopt it, but that's where it's going to end. Or it's going to be something which can really take out the real world problem and actually contribute to what Ethereum stands is very important for us.
Yeah, for me, it's when something can plug into what I might call like the Web3 technology stack. And what I mean by that is, suppose you took a centralized kind of Web 2.0 company like, say, Uber, and instead of trying to compete as a company, you build Uber the protocol. And you remove Uber, that centralized rent extracting entity, and you build a fully peer-to-peer network. What is the stack of technologies that you would need to use in order to build Uber the protocol? And suddenly you run into all sorts of very simple problems. Like if you're building Twitter the protocol to compete with Twitter the company, where do you store the tweets? It's like these very simple problems. And that kind of server-client architecture needs to be completely rethought in a decentralized peer-to-peer environment. So then you need a system like IPFS with Filecoin on top of that in order to ensure data redundancy and high uptime, high bandwidth requirements for the end user. So until you have a robust IPFS system, for example, up and running, it's very hard to imagine Twitter the protocol working, right? So to me, it's the order of operations here. And also thinking about, what are the core components of that Web3 technology stack that will enable a whole series of dApps to be built on top.
Does anybody else here, Mark, Gil, have something you want to add when it just comes to the way you think about a community in this space?
So I was early at eBay, and I think often community gets misspoken as this idea that everyone wants to help for reasons that no one understands. And this summer where we can sort of hang out. And so I think it's important when you're developing a community to think about it in those incentive terms of sort of what is in it for my community so that they have an incentive to help me be successful.
Yeah, that's really...
I think that's really key to think about incentives and what motivates people. I said yesterday, for those of you at the dinner, at Venture One of our early investors said to me, our job is to infuse love into the blockchain. And I said, well, I'm not sure I know how to do that. But I think the message was taken, and then, you know, when I come to events like this, and I see a community forming around a movement, then I can begin to understand how we can infuse an energy of something into a technology, and how those two things can work together. And I think that, you know, yes, incentives are important, but incentives aren't simply monetary. And they're not simply, you know, I want this or I want that. An incentive can be that you want a whole community to benefit from what you're doing, and I think that's really the beauty of this.
Yeah, I think I want to kind of boil down all the wisdom you guys are saying into some key things that you look at when you're opening up a white paper. When you think about whether you want to invest in a project, and you open up this white paper, what is it that you really want to see? I mean, all different kinds of white papers, all different kinds of projects, but is there anything underlying that you always want to see in a white paper, starting with Olaf and going down?
Yeah, I think one thing for me, and this has just historically been, this is not a super crisp answer, but when I see a project and I read the white paper and I can't stop thinking about it. It's that simple for me. Like when it feels like, okay, there's a real breakthrough here, and I just can't stop thinking about, like, okay, taking to the logical conclusion, this is going to have massive implications. It's basically when it becomes like a little Pac-Man running around my brain. That is like an early indicator that this is an interesting technology or interesting project. But obviously there's a lot more after that feeling, but I think that's the first and very important piece for me.
How about you, Mark? What do you think?
I think it's that aha moment that you know, the first time I read the Satoshi's white paper, and then, you know, the Ethereum white paper, these real visionary, especially at the protocol level, white papers. And then, you know, if you're looking at application, you know, it just doesn't make sense. I just keep coming back to, does it make sense? I just don't think different rules apply here. I think if you have the aha moment at every paragraph, and you say, oh, that's how, you know, the community would adopt it. Okay, this is how the economics, you know, should work. And you sort of agree with it all the way through, and then you do your research. That's how I evaluate it.
Yeah, I agree with Mark on this. I think recently if there is something which is stuck in my head, and even though they're solving a problem which I've already read 5 times in different white papers, but there is something different, and I want to keep on coming back to it after 2 days or 3 days, and want to keep on talking about this to figure out if I am missing something, or this is actually a very different way to solve this problem, then I know that I have to talk to the entrepreneurs, and there has to be a next step.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess following up on Mark's pad together, but when you do get through the whole...
If people are looking to invest in a project, what they should really be asking themselves is, does this feel to me like a catchy song or like a book I can't put down? Do I keep coming back to it?
Yeah.
I really want to leave some time for questions with the audience. Does anybody want to ask questions of our panelists, or should I keep bothering them? Because I have lots of questions for them. If I show of hands? Yeah, go for it.
Regarding your conversation about looking for networks and protocols that are going to build, like, they will take out the Ethereum. You can't expect the Ethereum VM to do that, or other pieces.
Can you?
Yeah, no, I will repeat it.
Yeah, okay.
Basically, what other technologies outside of Ethereum will we need to see? I think that was sort of the question. I mean, I think there's a lot. You see these kind of other protocols being built on top of Ethereum that I would say act as like infrastructure or like middleware that aren't meant to be as much an extensible programming language like Solidity, say, or Serpent, but rather, you know, application specific, yet still open for a whole ecosystem of things to be built on top. So 2 examples here that I talked about earlier would be the 0x decentralized exchange protocol, as well as Filecoin. So both of those systems are meant for really pretty specific use, but they both, you know, any sort of application built on top can call those systems in order to execute a very specific function. So I do think there's a stack here, and that Ethereum and other kind of smart contract platforms are maybe the base of that stack. But I think that many things need to get built on top before we're going to have successful end users using these types of things in a real scalable way. I think stuff like the Ethereum name system as well would fall into this category of being really important infrastructure middleware that's necessary beyond just that base protocol.
Anybody else have any questions they have for their panelists? Go ahead.
You guys all mentioned regulation as a big potential issue. One way to get around that is by staying anonymous. That's what Satoshi did, right? And you might say, oh, well, no one will trust that. That's handling $100 billion, and now the code kind of speaks for itself. When do you think we're going to start to see some really big, interesting, anonymous stuff happening?
Do we want very big, real, interesting, anonymous stuff happening? I don't know. I think my perspective is if you want to take an experimental project and you want to take it to every household across the world, regulations are not always negative. Governments getting involved, institutional capital getting involved is actually going to give, basically open up the circle to a really big manner. And at least sitting where we are, I want government to come quickly and let me know how can I do my security tokens, because there are a lot of products for which security tokens makes a lot of sense, and we want to able to do it with a very...
And I'm involved in actually works on trying to but 20 years of being involved in the tech industry here, what I can tell you is the regulators always come when it's worth something. So it's nice to hear the regulators are coming because it means what we're doing is worth something.
I completely agree with that. I think it's a sign of the maturation of the space. And a lot of, I think, the work that we have to do is to build a bridge between the crypto community and other industries. I can remember when, we started working on Omega, and I was talking to Joe about involving Wall Street. John Mack, from Morgan Stanley, is an investor in our vehicle. And it was a real conversation we had about, should we take this and go and talk to Wall Street about it? And the answer was yes. Let's work with them.
Mm-hmm. I think another thing that's very interesting to me is that developers that are actually working on these projects, their tether to the non-blockchain world is often their financial relationship with a nonprofit foundation or holding company, like the Ethereum Foundation, say, that's either paying their salary or giving them tokens or something like that. What I could see happening in the future is that these coin offerings and token distributions, instead of that money going into a bank account controlled by, say, a nonprofit foundation in Switzerland or a holding company in the Caymans, instead this going directly into a DAO that basically governs the development of the protocol. So something I've been thinking about a lot is that I think a killer app for DAOs might be building blockchain protocols. And then the kind of relationship that any given developer has financially with that protocol is through the DAO, and their payments are coming from the DAO, instead of that being a kind of legal entity tied to a bank account and things like that. Now that DAO, though, has to have a series of kind of service providers built around it so that you can pay the lights in an office or something like that. And so it does add new complexities. But I do think that there is a potential future where many of these projects, when they receive financing, that money, instead of going into a legal entity, goes into a smart contract system that actually governs the development of the protocol.
I think we have time for one last question. Did you want to? Okay, we're good. Yeah, go for it.
What is your top frustration making investments in the blockchain space today?
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
I'd say it's the same frustration I've had as an angel investor, which is there's always too many ideas and not enough me. I mean, there's a lot going on, and it's a lot to process, and we're all flooded. And so I really appreciate the people who are patient and somewhat understanding with the fact that I don't always get back to people in 12 seconds.
I think for me is every time when a company comes and do their valuation based on the bubble valuation of their token launch. And they do so strong $100 million valuation of something.
Is that no company comes to a VC firm fully formed and able to carry out its mission, often without some help. And so every time we look at a company, we think that's even more important.
Yeah, for me, I know you guys both mentioned investing in companies. I think this is one of my frustrations, is a misunderstanding of the relationship between like some sort of for-profit company and a peer-to-peer protocol they're developing, the ability to extract values in the way that Web 2.0 companies extract value from the networks they own doesn't really exist here, right? Because anyone in the world can, this is an open source protocol, they can make a copy of that protocol, remove that rent extraction mechanism, and basically cut out any sort of, quote, business model that this company had. So I think that there's often a confusion and porting of the old way of thinking, both on the investor side, from venture investors, as well on the entrepreneurial or developer side, thinking about how to actually be made wealthy from this. And it's looking to an old model when you really need to rethink how there is no revenue, right? Or I don't think there should be. If there's revenue, in my opinion, you probably need to completely rethink what you're doing. If you're doing a token, so anyway.
All right, thank you so much. Oh, yeah, you're all good? All right, last call. So that's about all the time we have today. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I feel very enlightened, and I hope everybody here has a great day at the rest of the conference.
One of the most exciting buzzwords in this space is IPFS, or Interplanetary File Sharing. Give it up for Juan Benet, the founder of Protocol Labs, as we go interstellar to learn about the future of file sharing.
Do what you do, don't overthink. I do what I do, all I can do is me. We do it different, a little bit more distinct.
All right, hey everyone. So my name is Juan, as you just heard. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, I think. All right, I'm just going to keep talking and hopefully it goes away. Step back. Is that better? All right. Great, so I'm going to do something that's pretty different from my normal talks. If you've seen me speak before, usually I have a very long slide deck that I kind of blaze through, and I just mash you with a ton of concepts and things. And it's fun for some of the people working on the tech right now don't get the time to think about, or the majority of the users looking at the tech that's coming don't get a lot of time to think about the position of the entire space. But I want you to get a baseline on the importance of the work that's being done. There's a sense that we can create something really stable for computing globally, that we can fix a lot of the problems of the internet, and there's a sense that we can build something so robust that it's extremely difficult for powerful attackers to take it down. But I want you to viscerally connect with this idea. So I want you to think for a moment, I'll give a little bit of time, and I want you to think for a moment about your personal relationships with other people, your family, your coworkers, your friends, and think about how you have those relationships and how much computing and the internet is a part of those lives. Like, how many times do you message your family over your phone or on email or something like that? When you work, how many times do you rely on some chat system, or you rely on something like GitHub, or you rely on some online medium? If you're like most people in Silicon Valley, and other places in the world, this is increasingly, a higher and higher percentage of your life is going through the web in some way. It's going through the internet. It's going through a lot of these data platforms that you have zero control over. And so as you think about these relationships, and as you think about the data that you generate and the data that you send each other and so on, also consider, where is it stored? Who has that data? Like, if you were to visualize the last 10 emails that you sent, where are they stored? Who's got control over it? And if something went wrong, like if today the internet just kind of halted for a moment, what would you do? How would you get in contact with your family? How would you get in contact with your coworkers? How would you go about your business? Or your emergency response to the fact that the internet is stopped and like this is a crisis now. We should step back and realize that by this point, by 2017, personal computing and the internet are such an integral part of our lives that we have become completely dependent on it. And it's extremely difficult to dissociate yourself and your daily lives from that. And so it calls into question, where is all this data getting stored? Who does have control over this? What are the failure modes of this stuff? Like, when can I get access to this? How do I govern who looks at all this content? And so this is underwriting a lot of the, or powering a lot of the revolution that you're seeing right now. The impetus to decentralize a lot of stuff, the impetus to make things publicly verifiable, and the whole point of making things not rely on trusted third parties comes from a realization that it's generally a bad idea to place all of your reliance and full trust on entities, no matter how good they are, or no matter how good their track record has been. Because sometimes things can change. Sometimes certain people or groups can get control of those organizations, or more broadly can gain control of organizations larger than those and compel them to do certain things. So I think this wasn't so clear to me until I met somebody in Germany who census keeping records to go on. This is why decentralization and taking control of your data is important. Control of your identity, control of what you're sending, what you're signing, what you're declaring to the world is actually coming from you. And it's this reliance on computing that makes us kind of step back and saying, no, we need to build a better system. We need to build layers of computation that do not rely so completely on trusted third parties. And aside from thinking about your day-to-day now and how much you use computing, kind of project into the future. Think about 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, 15, 20. How much will we use computing then, right? I mean, it's only increasing. So unless something tragically bad happens, more and more of our lives are going to go over the wires. And soon we're going to have implants, potentially. Soon we'll have VR and AR ubiquitously. And soon here might be 10, 20 years, but that's a blink of an eye in reality, right? And so the time is now to fix all of this stuff and place a better infrastructure so that we can rely on it with much stronger guarantees. And so the good news, so this is kind of scary, right? And it's like everyone's like, oh no, man, like this is a huge bummer. Like, why are you telling me this at 11 a.m. on a Friday? And I'm saying this because the work that's happening now through things like Ethereum, through projects like IPFS and Filecoin, and things like Bitcoin and a whole bunch of other things in the space are making an improvement, are actually improving the infrastructure layer to prevent a whole bunch of these kinds of attacks and to give you more reliability and resilience when you need it. And so the thing about security is that you never value security until something bad happens, right? So you never really consider security that much until some disaster occurs that costs an enormous amount of money. And this is, you've seen like huge leaks happen, you've seen crypto being broken, you've seen wallets being stolen, and so on. We've seen a ton of things that happen. We need to think about the security of our everyday data in the same way, and the sovereignty of our everyday data in the same way. So things like Ethereum are already putting in place, to a great degree, and uncensorable transaction system where you can send short messages to each other and do small computations with each other. You can do big computations too, but it gets pretty expensive. And that's an extremely powerful primitive. So when you think about computation generally, that's a massively powerful primitive. You need other pieces. You need something like really scalable storage, and so that's what Filecoin and IPFS are about. You also need things like general purpose high performance computation that's decentralized, that can rely on things like Ethereum. But you need also an anonymity network that can allow you to send messages to each other in a censorship-resistant way. There are a whole bunch of other things. And so we need to get all of the tech we're building into people's hands in that way. And that's going to require a whole bunch of product focus, and focus on mobile, and focus on a whole bunch of pieces of the infrastructure so that we can get there. And so the 3 points that I want to leave you with today are that, first, our future is about computation in a huge way, in ways that much deeper and bigger than it is now, and it's in danger, right? So right now, the way we're headed, and with the tech that we have today and the things that we rely on today, a lot of parties can get involved in stopping your activity or preventing you from doing something or attacking you and so on. And so the future's in danger. The good news is, the second point, the good news is the systems we're building today are making a measurable improvement. Not everything's figured out. There's still a lot of questions, and things are still coming. But we're already making some improvements. However, and the most important one, it's not going to happen or survive unless you take part in it. It's not going to work unless all of you and the people you know are starting to use and build things on these systems. If we don't do that, then this will be a phase, and then a lot of the world will remain in the walled gardens of the world, and it will remain in infrastructure that's worse for them. And so this is a big call to action for the people here to, if you're not working already on this stuff very, very closely, consider it very, very seriously, and consider it just from what impacts and benefits it can bring to you, to your family, to your workplace, and so on. And just reflect on the fact that very recently, Turkey blocked Wikipedia, and that was a big deal. And then suddenly Spain censored the referendum, and then sent a bunch of police to stop a democratic vote, unconstitutional democratic vote, but there's a tension there in a very liberal Western country, right? So things may not always be as stable as they might seem, or as safe as they might seem. And so really, the world, or this world, needs your help in order to stay in place, in order to reach its full potential, and in order to reach all of the people out there in the world. Specifically, I would like to call 2018 the year where we really build consumer products on top of all this stuff. It's not there yet. There's a few consumer things, but nowhere near where we need to be. The majority of applications don't quite work yet in mobile, and so on. So let's make it so that by the end of 2018, maybe in a year from now, we can reflect and think, oh yes, now there are massive applications in use by a lot of people around the world relying on this technology, and they're a lot safer for it. So I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to take a few questions about this, or reflections, because I think it's important for you to engage with this thought and to think about it for a second. This is a much more philosophical talk, I guess, but I would like to hear your thoughts. I think back there's somebody with a...
So, if you look at the storage costs on...
And it's not, you shouldn't treat Ethereum as your... Take a look at IPFS and Filecoin. Those are systems I work on. You should also take a look, there's a bunch of others, things like Swarm, and, there's a number of other systems that you can take a look at. So that's, that is a very important foundational layer, making sure that you can store things on the network and retrieve them in a censorship-resistant way, and not, relying on any trusted third party. Right now, the majority of the data you have relies on 3 parties: Google, Amazon, and Azure. And so those 3 parties control the majority of the web applications that you have, because they have the best cloud systems. So, consider that. Any other question or thought? Back there.
I work a lot with database, so I'm just wondering, a lot of people talk about IPFS, Filecoin, Swarm. Can you maybe expand upon maybe what kind of data storage people should be looking for if they're looking at storing more than just files in a decentralized way?
Yeah, so you're saying, what if I don't have files? I have a database, and I want to store users' data and things like that.
Yes, user data.
So these systems are actually, the word file system may not be the perfect, it might be a little bit of a misnomer here, in that IPFS and Filecoin are designed to deal with those kinds of use cases as well. So you will be able to store the data backing a database in those systems. There's a lot of stuff that's improvements that are going to make that possible and faster. And those systems are not live and scalable and so on. IPFS is live. I think Swarm is also live. Filecoin will be coming in 2018. So take a look at that. I can't expand on it now in 2 minutes, but go online. There's a lot of talks about all these systems that go in detail into it. And they also go into detail as to why you want certain properties, right? So commoditizing the storage market is a big deal here. Like making it so that a ton of people that have hard drives around the planet can add those hard drives to the network so that people can store their stuff on them without relying on one single party doing all of that for you. There's another question back there.
So you highlighted a critical piece of our history, which is IBM's using their technology at the time to enable Nazi Germany to do its thing. Can you talk about the importance of the new distributed and decentralized identity standards that are coming out?
Yeah, totally. So I think this is one of my favorite pieces of work that's happening right now. And I think maybe the flagship project, like broader-based project of projects, is the Rebooting Web of Trust movement, and then things like Uport and Civic, and there's a bunch of other, and Blockstack, and there's a number of other systems. The push right now is to establish a way for you to digitally identify yourself and authenticate yourself, and do everything that has to do with proving that it's you who's doing some action, or proving there's some information claimed about you online, without again relying on trusted third party, with your address, knows where, and probably it's searchable on Google at some point. So probably don't do that. But the thing here is we are making remarkable improvements in structuring they don't have the same level of record-keeping infrastructure we do, and there we can just leapfrog a lot of that tech to go into this kind of thing, where you can really rely on selective disclosure and not reveal all information and not give it to certain parties that shouldn't have it. All right, one more question and then we're done.
Hi, so these software systems and protocols allow us a lot of leverage against the kind of censorship that you're talking about and resilience, but I'm wondering what happens at the physical layer. What work is there left to do for secure computing and censorship-resistant hardware and networking?
Totally. So if, why work on making sure software isn't owned if hardware is completely owned anyway? It's a great point. So I think where we are right now, you basically have to trust Intel and a couple other players, and if you don't want to do that, you're basically out of the game, out of computing. That's not a great place to be. So I think standards around secure enclaves will help. Much more review over what's happening in certain chips and so on will matter. So part of what we got out of the Snowden leaks was seeing how there's a whole bunch of hardware exploits that people never know about and allow remote actors to take control of your machine completely without your knowledge or the OS's knowledge at all. Effectively turning devices into complete surveillance systems, and or worse, right? It could be worse. So that's kind of like a surveillance agency. Imagine if some other actors that actually want to do something bad took control of all of this. There's these huge botnets that use IoT and so on. So there's that piece. Then there's also, at the connectivity layer, making sure that you have a network that doesn't rely on ISPs that can be coerced by a few parties to do something bad, right? So a lot of ISPs can be coerced to give a copy of all their traffic to certain parties, or can be coerced to stop the flow, right? So in Egypt, we saw this. The government ordered the ISPs to just completely cut off the internet, and that was it. For a while, there was no internet in Egypt. And this happened overnight, right? Like people woke up to no internet, no connectivity. People couldn't talk to their family. They couldn't talk to their friends. Nobody knew what was going on. Everybody flooded to the streets. And that's actually what triggered the revolution, because that was just like the last straw and on a whole string of things. So we need a network we need a physical network for routing messages to be able to emerge that does not rely on the current ISPs. So think about mesh networks and think about long-range wireless and so on. It'd be great if we had, it's fine if it's super expensive, but if it's at least some way of emailing and sending things like that's hard and not trivial. You have to also triangulate wireless signals, so that might be a good direction. All right, I think we're done. Thank you very much, and consider all this.
The biggest use case for blockchains is currently trading. With daily volumes of over $5 billion, digital currencies are proving that they can play ball in a highly regulated field. Matthew Leising of Bloomberg will try to uncover the details and how to coexist with the existing industry.
I wanna know you're alright, but I don't wanna know too
Hey, everybody. Thank you for being here. We're hoping to have a great discussion about the future of crypto trading and exchanges. My name is Matthew Leising. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg News. This is Ayako Miyaguchi. She is a managing director at Kraken, Japan. That's Alan Keegan, the co-founder and CEO of Omega One. That's Rain Riviere. She is the lead architect for Prism from Shapeshift. And at the end, we have Michael Oved, who's co-founder of co-founder of AirSwap. So what's exciting to me about this is how new all of it is and how we can watch people build exchanges and brokerages and all the other stuff that you need for a market. And these are the people who are doing it. They're not done yet, and they're not by any measure, but if we're going to talk about the future of exchanges, to me that's a decentralized exchange. And but what does that mean? So we're here with Michael, and you're running AirSwap, which is decentralized. Can you tell us what you're doing that's new and different from what is maybe people know about in the traditional financial world? Is there a switch? Okay, well, maybe, yeah, maybe Rain, you could,
awesome.
There we go.
Does this work? Yeah. Okay, so first you start with centralized exchanges. So centralized exchanges have been around for, in the modern version, electronic execution venues have been around for, maybe 15 years, let's say. They're really, really low latency. Everything has evolved very rapidly. Design is actually going to provide a lot of benefit to society. And what we took with AirSwap is we took a strict peer-to-peer design, which we believe is private, scalable, and fair, and allows for users to trade on a global network. And we think that that's the right design for blockchain. And we went through, released our white paper that went extremely well. Talk about decentralized exchange a little bit. So decentralized exchange promises two things. Number one, you always have control over your information and your assets. And number two, you can trade on a global network. So this is something that Olaf kind of touched on earlier, which is that I think one of the problems in the crypto space right now is that these exchanges are very segmented. They're very fragmented. So in order to actually trade, you have to connect to a lot of different venues. And so what a decentralized trading platform promises is the ability for people to trade with each other all over the world.
Ayako, you are at Kraken, and can you tell us that's a centralized exchange? Can you tell us how you fit in with your users, and where does Kraken fit into that in the ecosystem?
Sure. I'm going to just talk about who I am, and then I'm managing in Japan, but I've been with Kraken Exchange. That's one of the biggest global exchanges. It's been a while. I've been with the company since before the launch, actually, in 2013. And then also I've been heavily and intentionally being involved with the regulatory situation in Japan. And then I believe we contributed a lot to the ecosystem. As you know, Japan has become one of the biggest market. And then now we hear about decentralized exchanges, and then I guess I'm from the decentralized side, and then we'll need to defend.
Are you the man?
Defend this side too, but it's I think for the entire ecosystem it's good to have both, but also since I've been in the industry for a long time, and realistically, Japan just. Japanese regulators, FSA, just announced their stance against ICO. That's really the biggest cost for our time and energy. It has been
regulation.
Regulations.
Interesting.
So to scale, going to be my biggest question, and then could be a challenge for decentralized exchange, as much as I also would love to support the idea too.
And Michael, you touched on this, but it feels like something that differentiates you guys on stage here is the idea of custody. It's who controls the assets. At AirSwap, at Shapeshift and Prism, and on Omega One, the users are in control of their assets at all times. At Kraken, if I have an account there, you are holding my cryptocurrency and my money, and that's something that you control. So in thinking of this and the new decentralized exchange idea that's really kind of brand new, it feels like you're giving custody back to the users, which it feels to me very rare in the traditional financial world. Like if I have an account at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, my futures and my cash are under their control, and they decide whether a trade is good or whether it's busted. In a decentralized world, you don't have that. So is that what you got? Was that a motivating force here? Was to kind of give custody back to the people who want to use these markets?
Yeah, and I think what allows you to do that is really blockchain technology, which is very powerful and beautiful. And on top of blockchain, you have smart contracts, which allow you to write atomic swaps. So you can swap into or out of an asset immediately. There's no settlement risk. There's no clearinghouse. There's no exchange to do the margin or the settlement. Anything like that.
It either works or it doesn't, right? Like that's the idea. So there's no broken trade. Like it's immediate, either yes or no.
Exactly. I think one thing you do bring up that's very interesting is trade disputes. And if someone makes an error, like in the case of Knight Capital, for example, you don't want the firm to necessarily go bankrupt just because of an error. I don't think that's totally the design behind the intention behind immediate settlement. So I think that there's going to have to be some sort of balance between trade dispute and atomic swaps. There's going to have to be some sort of creative solution around there.
And Alan, you guys are working as an agency broker for folks who want to trade crypto, but they don't necessarily want to do it themselves. They'd rather pay you to do it, and you don't maintain custody. How do you guys think about that? And
so there's an interesting thing in the spread of technologies like on the table right now that we're looking at, where there's a lot of stuff about the development and maturation of the infrastructure for trading cryptocurrencies that is unique and special. The ability to have like a peer-to-peer decentralized network, the ability to do atomic swaps and non-custodial exchanges. And then there's a lot about it that really isn't special and is very normal. The kind of starting with bespoke deals, moving to little black book brokers, to more electronic brokers and centralized exchanges that start out fragmented and then kind of centralized. It's interesting because as far as the maturation of the space from the dimension of who the players are and who's involved, getting the more institutional money in, going from, now there's family offices who have no fiduciary duty buying, there's alternative hedge funds with the open mandate of solving that, both with the new technology, solve counterparty risk with a non-custodial trading system. Or you can solve counterparty risk, at least as far as being able to have people come into the space by building up institutional credibility over a long period of time and being viewed as a low enough risk counterparty that people are willing to play on your thing. You can solve liquidity by what we're doing, taking the trades, aggregating liquidity across exchanges, executing across all of them, or by trying to attract as much liquidity as you can to your platform, whether it's centralized or decentralized, and whatever limitations come with those. And then the last thing on the compliance and best practices thing is that's kind of a space-wide mission of creating what it looks like to be a compliant holder of cryptocurrencies so that institutions kind of have a playbook to run by when they want to put money into the space.
And I would imagine the comfort level that you bring to some of the institutional and more traditional investors is we're an agency brokerage. You know what that is. You use it for all sorts of other assets.
Yeah.
Now you can use it for this new asset
but we also
class.
are making the decision to do the non-custodial wallets in order to have no counterparty risk. And that is something that requires a little bit of explaining. So we're kind of picking and choosing from what we know about the development of market infrastructure in previous assets. It doesn't look that different in a lot of ways. And then the application of blockchain technology that we actually think solves the most important problems for adopting the institutional money.
Okay. Rain, what you guys are doing at Prism is allowing folks to trade a large basket of cryptocurrencies. What's the need there? What problem are you solving?
Sure. So Shapeshift, of course, has built its model around this non-custodial, or at least like very minimal custodianship. You send in one asset and you get another one back, and if you don't get it back right away, there's a problem. So there's very little room for things to be fudged. And Prism, the product that I helped create, is an asset portfolio. So it's like a basket of currencies. And this time we went really a completely decentralized route, and the entire system is built with smart contracts. It's a little different than some of the other products represented here because it's not meant for high volume trading. It's meant to have a portfolio that you intend to be exposed to for a significant amount of time, 24 hours plus. So some of I think the harder challenges for decentralized exchanges in general come from that high volume environment and the different ways, the different risks that can happen there. So Prism is somewhat immune to those things, but it takes advantage of using smart contracts, having a little more of a runway for time, and having a fully decentralized system.
And so you're offering a way for people who maybe want to hedge, or all at the same time have a lot of strategies going on in one place.
Yeah, that's right. And it is peer level of indirect.
Or if an algo goes nuts. In 2013, Goldman Sachs algorithm went crazy and they sent a whole bunch of options trades, kind of blew up the market. A lot of those trades were broken. Or stop orders were triggered on the way down, you're going to be pissed off. Are you? But the exchange can step in and say, okay, we'll make you whole. Is one of the risks that there is nobody there for mistakes? And how do you guys think about that in your business plans when it's going to happen? Somebody puts in the wrong key or something happens, and it's kind of like, well, I didn't know who I was trading with. Who do I even talk to?
Yeah, there's a few different things we've thought about, I guess, and those are very, very valid concerns. You want to ultimately ensure that your participants are trading in a fair and orderly market. You want people to be able to be guaranteed that they're not going to go bankrupt if they make a mistake, and mistakes happen all the time, especially when we're in an algorithmic trading world, which we are. I mean, 90% of stocks are algorithmically traded right now. So I think what this is going to end up looking like for the exchanges that have a lot of algorithmic flow and have a lot of retail flow and a lot of institutional flow is it will be a hybrid of decentralized, and parts of it will be governed, which ultimately is centralized. You might need to have bonding systems where people who are trading on the platform bond money, and if there's a dispute, that can be used. The bond can be used in that dispute. That's one of the things we've thought about. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly a very interesting question. I think that going fully decentralized right out of the gate is going to be very difficult for people to really swallow.
Ayako, has Kraken ever had to bust trades? Does that come up? Did something go wrong on Kraken ever, and you said, okay, no, we're actually not going to allow that one to go through?
Something went wrong with
yeah, a mistake. Is that ever happened?
Or on our side? Not really, but the tokens what we list always have challenges, right? Even though we select our the list of tokens very, very cautiously, it's not really easy to be listed on Kraken. I get these requests every day, but there are things that we can't really predict in advance, whether it's Ether fork or even like Bitcoin. And then for that, it is really, in order for us to maintain the business, it's really the business decision at the same time, like for the long-term profit and also sustainability, like why do we need to stop funding now?
And then you're a company that isn't, and also like what are the benefits and like losses of having a centralized authority you can reason with in unexpected or bad outcomes versus having something you can't reason with. Like you have the blockchain just doing its thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a really high-level question that applies to basically every kind of decentralized application you can create.
Yeah, and then it seems like with you guys, you don't have user accounts and there's maybe no physical location. Are you getting feedback from regulators on how they're starting to think about this? Has anybody reached out to you, or what's the state of play there?
We haven't, I guess, directly spoken to regulators yet. We plan to, definitely. Is this on? Okay. We plan to definitely engage with regulators. But if you think about it, at the core of it, a decentralized exchange isn't an exchange in the classical sense of the word. An exchange is somewhere where you go and you meet other people, and then you trade, and then the clearing is done by the exchange itself. So in this case, you're just doing a peer-to-peer trade where it's me selling something to you, and you just do an atomic swap, and it's basically more akin to, let's say, selling something on eBay versus going and trading something on an order and having a margin call and having to have that trade actually cleared properly. So I think it doesn't. I mean, this is my opinion. I don't want to speak for the lawyers that we've been working with, but I think that this kind of falls into maybe some sort of new territory that isn't quite an exchange and isn't quite nothing.
Yeah, and I want to jump in on that just with this idea that this is new territory, right? We constantly need to remind ourselves that this is a new world, it's a new economy that we're helping to create. And so one thing that's really different, I mean, we're talking about exchanges and these really traditional financial entities and part of the financial ecosystem. But this is different. This isn't just a new technology that's been introduced to Wall Street. So I don't think we should think about it just as a innovation in exchange technology. There's a beautiful ethos within the blockchain community that is asking the question, how do we change the world? And so there are internal questions to how exchanges should operate and how to prevent front running and how to provide this fair system. But I think we should also continue repeatedly asking this question of how does the financial world, how does the world of finance create a better world, not just create centralized wealth? If we use decentralized tools to amass central wealth for whoever it has the most knowledge and
the playing field is safe. So I think it's a balance that everybody must strike. But I think it's also an interesting point Michael made. Maybe think about the equities markets. There will be a dark pool. There will be the New York Stock Exchange. There will be a call-around market. It's a mix and match. It's not like one of you guys needs to be the be-all, end-all. And it seems like, again, to what I was saying, it's fascinating to watch this being built kind of before our eyes.
Right. Also, to that point, and looking at the space and talking about different technologies that are being created and whether you try to shoehorn the technology you're creating into a pre-existing regulatory framework or apply new regulation or any of that stuff, there is a fundamental potential here it is a technology that can be the new pipelines for capital flows in the world, and how those are built, the kind of outcomes that creates are sort of yet to be defined. We're hitting a lot of constraints right now in capital allocation, just global capital allocation, with trillions of dollars in nearly zero yielding bonds, and then other people in different countries having no access to capital, even if they have a great idea and a great investment. So there is sort of an opportunity here to reboot the fundamental pipeline, replace the technology on which capital is allocated, and at the same time sort of change the ethos and the outcomes. Which is, it's important not to try to shoehorn the things that you create that is like a peer-to-peer, totally decentralized trading network into saying it's an exchange. It's a new, different thing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the current financial system we went through in 2008, I was on a Wall Street trading desk in 2008, and we were a small company, and in order to trade in the FX markets, you essentially need to trade through what's called a prime broker. And what a prime broker means is someone that's AAA credit rating, they can never go bankrupt, right? And they're only able to trade with other prime brokers. And this is centralization at its finest, is because in order to trade in the FX markets, you can only trade through these 8 to 20 or however many there are prime brokers. And we actually traded and cleared through AIG. And when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, a lot of people don't know this, but AIG also went bankrupt for probably 24 hours until they were bailed out. And that was fucking terrifying, right? And that was, you think like the whole world is basically, because these financial systems have just basically frozen and no one can interact with each other, no one can trade with each other anymore, all the money flows in the world have just stopped because of centralization. That's something that we have the opportunity right now to change. And that's really incredibly inspiring and beautiful thing to be working on.
And again, not to, for the audience to misunderstand what I meant. Like, I totally agree with what Rain said. And then also, every day we actually have heavy argument with the regulators that things don't work that way. And so I think still the education.
Excuse me, it's made me think that in that. Sorry, go ahead.
So every day is really like, I would like to say it's positive fight, but I'm also like in charge of Mt. Gox
Half fight, half education.
bankruptcy proceeding, talking to the trustees of the Mt. Gox, and then it's hard when I, like in this technology world. So, but they need to learn this so that we can get there, and that's our goal.
And to Alan's point, peer-to-peer is great and new in this world. And traditional finance, maybe we don't have the right word for it, so we shouldn't call you guys an exchange. Traditional finance, that's the over-the-counter market, right? So maybe here it's the over-the-blockchain market.
Right.
I don't know. But it's a...
And also, the thing like coming out in this, like there's a really interesting thing in the space of there's an idea of building the new financial system, and part of that isn't making the peer-to-peer networks. Part of that is onboarding the capital and centralized exchanges. There's this whole stack of things that have to happen. Sorry, that's all I was going to say.
All right. Well, keying off of a question from the last panel, I wanted to ask each of you, what's your biggest frustration right now? What's the wall you're hitting that you wish you could get around and that would help you move forward the most? You can't say regulation because you already said that.
Frustration?
Uh-huh.
Oh, well, it's hard because that's the first.
There's nothing else. Everything else is awesome.
It's going great, but actually, Rain and I were supposed to hijack this. It's not frustration, but I want to say at the end that, great things are happening, and I'm also like personally doing things, starting new things to use this technology for social impact. And then when talking to the frustration side of people, like I'm trying to talk about something positive from this technology. So I don't know. I'm feeling great every day. So it's
good.
But doing this frustration side that's my job. But I think it's getting better.
Alan,
It's a really good question, and I'm actually thinking about it. I'm not sure if this is really appropriately characterized, but I feel like my biggest frustration is communication, because the way to like efficiently share ideas in the space, to efficiently explain things to people, has to bridge so many different levels of knowledge and so many different subjects, where for all the projects that we're involved in, there's people that you talk to that are very sophisticated in the crypto space and not very sophisticated in the financial space, or the other way around, or neither. And some are both, but then some other thing that's involved in the project you're doing. There's such a multidisciplinary aspect to a lot of things that we're doing. It can become very difficult to convey what you want to convey. When speaking to regulators, is just an example of that. Or
my biggest frustration, which it's funny to, so having been in the blockchain space for a couple of years now, I'm more and more confused as to how there is so much awareness of this vision of a decentralized economy and instead of having power focused on a few financial entities or governmental entities, decentralizing that, removing the intermediaries, how that is so well understood, and yet talking about decentralizing culture and talking about increasing access to more diverse populations and imagining a financial world that includes more, it is a hard leap for a lot of people to make. So it's both my biggest frustration, and it's more and more the reason that I'm doing work in this space.
Cool.
Yeah, and I would say there are new challenges every week. Every week is totally different. I mean, we just went through our token launch for the AirSwap token. That was probably one of the more challenging things I've done in my life, / crazy things I've done in my life. 72 hours of no sleep, but incredible experience, and we were so humbled by the support we got all over the world. And now the challenge is, I wouldn't call it a frustration, but the challenge is for us is growing the team, and we're aggressively looking for talent. And so if anyone is interested in working with AirSwap, come find me.
Great. All right, that's all the time we have. Let's give these guys a big round of applause.
Curiosity. We would like to invite everyone to please find a seat. We don't want the fire marshal to shut this crypto party down. History does not often repeat itself, but it often rhymes, at least according to Mark Twain. Please welcome Bill Tai for a historical perspective on waves of technology, community, and companies formed by the deconstruction and reconstruction of the flow of electrons, then bits, and what may lie ahead as blockchain automates societal behavior.
I could wait around for you.
Welcome, everybody. Kind of a big title. I was asked to do something that was a little lighthearted and a little expansive to get everybody up out of the weeds. So, title's kind of interesting. I think some of you that are developers or not know the initials, IFTTT. I'm going to pause and get to that a little bit later. My name's Bill Tai. I started as a semiconductor chip designer in the 80s and then ended up somehow becoming a venture capitalist in 1991. I've been funding companies for 26 years, over 100 of the desert. But some kind of competitive advantage and natural resources, there was really nothing there. But something kind of magical happened. I don't know if any of you have read this book or know who Neil Stephenson is. Snow Crash, it's a pretty interesting, prescient book that came out in 1992, and it presaged a lot of the things that we see in the digital world today. In 1999, a good friend of mine named Philip Rosedale, who was then the CTO of Real Networks, approached me and said, I'm going to build my next company. And I said, well, what's that going to be? And he said, well, you know that book Snow Crash where you got that guy that drops in his computer screen and he goes into a virtual world and his like digital person, his avatar is so closely aligned with him that the two worlds merge. And when his character, and you'll notice the little sword on the back there, when his character gets killed by a sword, he dies in the real world. Virtual and real became one. So he did that, and he built what was today called Second Life. It's still around. He's moved on to a second one called High Fidelity. But there was literally a world with nothing there, a grid of a bunch of pieces of real estate and some bodies milling about. So what happened? Well, there was no structured environment, so you had all these bodies milling about in the virtual world. Clock forward a few years, people are milling about. Philip and I are sitting in front of a bar in San Francisco at 2 a.m. having a very ethereal conversation. And I said, Philip, think about Las Vegas. What is Las Vegas? If you had a bunch of people sit in a circle and you put one poker chip into the system and you said, pass that chip to the right 1 million times a year, everybody would have $1 million a year of income. And if the velocity of money was high enough, you could basically peel little chunks off and build a casino and build a resort, build a hotel, build a city. So that happened. So he introduced something called the Linden dollar, I became Alan Greenspan Gollum in Second Life. And that was actually my character name. That is not my avatar because I wasn't that good. I didn't have the time to do that. But I had the name Alan Greenspan Gollum. And sure enough, that poker chip moved. So by 2006, cover of Business Week, there were people making real money in the virtual world translatable into fiat currency. And all of the human behavior that we all have seen for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years was happening in this digital universe. And as Alan Greenspan Gollum, even though I didn't have an official role, I was always trying to figure out what's going to happen to this monetary system. And in 2009 and 10, I ran into Bitcoin. And on Thanksgiving weekend 7 years ago, I wrote Philip. I said, Philip, this was a spike in my electricity, 2.5 million watts of electricity. What became Bitfury, because of my silicon background, I ended up funding their 28 nanometer ASIC that they've moved on to 16 now, but this is an example of mining today. This is one building of 3 in Iceland. There are data centers in Canada, Iceland, there was one in Finland, Azerbaijan, Republic of Georgia, Canada. This particular one burns 8 million watts. Mine was 2.5 million watts. And Bitfury is kind of a monster. That scaling and replicability is what we're going to talk about. So IFTTT, it's like the if TTT. If this, then that. Basically conditional logic statements. Our life is basically a series of conditional statements, chained conditional logic statements. And if you can break down whatever flow, electrons, information, societal structure, into basic granular elements, you can then deconstruct first, then reconstruct in an orderly way, in a scalable, replicable way to make them very efficient and just massively scaling. So in my lifetime, I've seen 3 of these waves. The first was basically taking the logic flow of electrons. It makes up all the devices that you use today that couldn't have existed without it, and basically breaking them down into little chunks that you could then reassemble with logic statements on silicon. That then translated into the same thing, reconstructing of the flow of information, first voice and data. And now we are basically reconstructing societal rule sets. So all of us in this room, it's a little bit like the Homebrew Computer Club. I moved out to the Valley in 1984, Sunnyvale. It was cherry orchards. The place, I lived in an apartment. The back fence was C.J. Olson cherry orchards. We used to climb it and get cherries. That whole thing has changed. We are in an environment now where